Rockets now the favorites to win the title. How should the Sixers feel after they missed out on the beard? And what does this all mean now for Kyrie's future? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to First Things First. I'm Jenna Wolf alongside Nick Wright, Brandon Marshall, Kevin Wilds. Nick, your Lakers, upset alert. There's a new sheriff in town, buddy. You worried at all?
Oh, that's a funny way. Jenna, that's the funniest joke you've ever told in the 3.5 years we've done this show. That is the funniest thing I've ever heard.
The bar is clearly low. I agree, Wilds. It was a compliment. This is where we start, though. James Harden saying he wanted out of Houston, and yesterday his wants came true. James Harden heading to Brooklyn to join Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. It took 4 teams and a truckload of draft capital to pull this off as they send 3 firsts, 4 pick swaps, and players to the Rockets, Pacers, and Cavs, yada, yada, yada. They get former MVP James Harden back in return. Now, Nick, you tweeted yesterday right after we went off the air that things were heating up on the Harden front. Go ahead and break down this whole deal for us, because there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of teams involved.
Yeah, all day yesterday, the scuttlebutt around the league was that this was going to happen. Boston and Miami kind of tapped out of the deal relatively early. Shockingly, Boston didn't want to actually put any good players in a trade. Okay. Philly, though, was hot and heavy after James Harden. Ben Simmons was prepared to be traded, which is why Brooklyn had to give up everything they legally were allowed to give up. You might say, oh, they kept Joe Harris. They weren't allowed to trade Joe Harris. Oh, they kept DeAndre Jordan. Nobody wanted DeAndre Jordan. They gave up everything. So let's show what everybody gave up, and then we'll show what everybody got. Obviously, the Rockets give up James Harden. The Nets give up all of those players, their depth, their entire control of their draft over the next 7 years. And the Cavs and Pacers, quietly, by the way, both huge winners just for being involved. So that's what everyone gave up. Here's what everyone got in return. And what we're going to focus on, obviously, is the Nets and the Rockets. So the Nets get James Harden back. The Rockets get those players. You might say, wait, they didn't want Karis LeVert? Wait, they could have had Ben Simmons. More on that in a moment. More importantly for the Rockets, they get 4 first-round picks, 3 from the Nets, 1 from Milwaukee that Indiana had control, or the Cavs had control of, and 4 pick swaps, meaning 4 years where if the Nets are worse than the Rockets can trade picks. So let's zoom in on one team. What did the Rockets give up? What did the Rockets get? They obviously gave up Harden. They get Dante Exum, who happens to be on an expiring contract, Victor Oladipo, who happens to be on an expiring contract, Crooks, and of course the draft capital. So this was, you know, if you're a pessimist, you would say Tillman Fertitta, who's not exactly the most, let's call it, liquid owner in the league right now, saves a bunch of money, gets under the salary cap, and it's a full-on rebuild. If you're an optimist, it's, well, they just liked Oladipo more than Karis LeVert. What did the Nets give up? What did the Nets get? The Nets obviously gave up, well, all of their depth. And I'm very interested to hear what Brandon has to say about that, because I know how much Brandon liked the Nets bench mob previously. They also give up all their draft picks. The Nets obviously believe those draft picks are going to be in the late 20s because they're going to be competing for championships. What they get is James Harden, and don't worry about that Cleveland pick. So that's what happened here. And Brandon, to me, this signaled a couple of things. One is that the Nets, with the uncertainty surrounding Kyrie Irving, with the injury to Spencer Dinwiddie, they said, you know what? What we currently have is not going to be good enough, and we have to go all in on having the only, there's no big threes in the league now, except for in Brooklyn, if and when Kyrie returns. The biggest question is, Brandon, aside from on the defensive side of the ball, I feel a bad team got worse defensively. The question is, how is the fit going to work when Harden has been the best player on a team for a decade? Now he's got to take a step back. How is Kyrie coming back? Is Kyrie going to be the third star, or do they even think Kyrie's going to be a part of it? Those are the questions. But before they had James Harden, Brandon, this was the team you picked to win the title. Do you think they got better, worse, or stayed the same yesterday?
Is that a rhetorical question?
No.
We got better. Of course we got better. In today's game, it's about scoring the basket. You know that. Who cares about defense? There's 3 teams in the entire NBA that plays defense right now. So, of course, we got better. And I don't think it's going to be a big 3. So I'll say that right now. I truly believe, and this is all me and my experience as a player and being around a lot of players, training guys since 2012. I think Kyrie's contemplating retirement. I don't think he's coming back. You can tell just how Nash has answered questions. You know, well, I'm coaching the guys who are here. And, well, I haven't heard from him. That was on the onset. So when you look at this deal, this is a really good deal for the Nets and everybody else. You know, they got richer with some draft picks. But at the end of the day, it's about winning championships. And I said this at the beginning. I said, look, if he wants out, Wilds, he's going to get out. And you and Nick and everybody else and Chris, well, Brandon, the team, they have all the leverage. The leverage. I said, look, the player, yes, they may have all the leverage now, but the player, if they stop playing or if their back hurts, they'll get out. And a lot of people are upset about how James Harden went about it. But put yourself in his shoes for 1 minute. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to disagree. I just want you to see the whole picture. You're in your 12th year. You did everything else. You don't have any ring. And you're thinking about, do I go chase that ring or do I stay here, don't win? I'm celebrated in Houston, but I'm also on that list with Charles Barkley as one of the greatest players to play the game and never go to never win a championship. So James Harden had to make that decision, and he had to use the only leverage he had, and that's his dribble, that's his shot, that's what he does on the court with his teammates. You take that away, and you make it really, really uncomfortable. That's what the Houston Rockets said they wanted to do, and they wasn't willing to go deep. Because when you got DeMarcus Cousins standing up before the trade happens and saying, you know what, the disrespect happened and started before today. That's what he said.
That's right.
So that locker room was uncomfortable. That entire organization was uncomfortable, Wilds. So I think, look, at the end of the day, 20 years from now, we will not be talking about James Harden and his exit from Houston. What we will be talking about is how James Harden paired up with KD, won a championship, and how he went down as one of the top and greatest players in NBA history. That's what we'll be talking about.
You're 100% right. We're not going to talk about James Harden exit from Houston on Friday. Today's the last day anyone cares about that. You're 100% right. It'll just be like Anthony Davis's ugly exit from New Orleans that no one has mentioned since the last 2 seconds that I mentioned it, and they'll never mention again. Okay, Nick, here's the big question I have. I want you to answer this. Who wants to be Chris Bosh? Who wants to be the guy who sacrifices their personal statistics for a championship? The most famous Chris Bosh, of course, was Chris Bosh. 24-11 in Toronto, goes to Miami, goes 19-9, wins 2 championships, famously scored 0 points in a Game 7. I guess you could say that's a positive because he didn't need to carry the load. On the other side, it's like, we're going to do it without you. Ray Allen, old Supersonics Ray Allen, 26 points a game, getting 21 shots. Goes to Boston with the great Paul Pierce, who I know you love, goes 17 points. 13 shots a game, and he ends up getting 2 rings, never scores 20 again. Kevin Love was scoring 26 points, 12.5 rebounds in Minnesota, goes to see your buddy, wins the championship, goes for 16-10. By the way, still in Cleveland, still hanging out in Cleveland, still hasn't been, I expect him to be moved. So out of the big 3 right now, and Brandon, you hinted at the retirement.